today, but now I hope we're up and running. So, welcome to this presentation about you in Texas. Here's the team, and I don't think there's much else to do but say, let's get this thing started. We will have a Q&A after.
So hello, my name is Giga on the forum. I will present to you the first part of the mod, which will be more the history of the mod and how things have evolved with the collaboration of Paradox and their mod support. So Mir in Texas, which has been a mod for 10 years with Miu, and Death in Texas, which arrived later on. So to start a mod, you need a concept, what you want to do with a mod. In my case, it was I was working on playing mega campaigns between CK, the first Crusader Kings, EU2, and Victoria. And I wanted to edit the map to have this a sort of continuum between the games. So I started tweaking with the map. And then it's expanded later on. And then you need a name. So at the time, there were lots of mods starting, and I was working on the mod. I wanted something around the map, but all the map cool names were picked at the time. So, and I stumbled upon the motto of the Habsburg dynasty, which was AEIOU. Pardon my Latin, Austria est imperare orbi universo. So it falls upon Austria to rule the whole world. So I just adapted it to put me, meaning that the player would say it comes to me to rule the whole world. Then you have to deal with the game engine. And for you two, it was kind of hell, especially when you wanted to edit the map, because the map files were hidden somewhere, and we had the chance to have Inferis who reverse engineered everything without talking with Paradox to get the map files that were editable in Photoshop. And then we could work with Photoshop in different stages and try then to use the tools to put it back into EU2 format. It was a bit of pain. Some modders who had been modding before me have done incredible map modes. But, well, fortunately for me, we were end of 2006, and they released EU3 in January of 2007. And when I started to look at the demo before they released the actual game, I saw that it was BMP files editable in Photoshop. I was, great, I'm going to be able to change the map. So we were able to work with layers and go crazy. So at first I wanted to do a simple map that went along from CK to EU3. But then with the player interactions, it was, you're editing the map completely, so why not do a historical map while you're at it? So I thought, yeah, let's go crazy. Well, I went really crazy with some provinces which were split everywhere. That's kind of get some love and hate interactions, like, for example, the famous 3 bishoprics in Lorraine, Metz, Toul, and Verdun, which basically in green is just one province. And it allows us to do some border war and have fun. But in the end, just having a map isn't enough for a mod. So with the interaction with the players and also with the other modders, it kind of grew. So we started increasing the content by more flavor, changing the way the coring, for example, changed also. So instead of having the core that arrived after so long a time, stripped like 25 years, we had something where we toyed with making quite expensive, but along the time, the better if it was the same culture, for example, it would quickly core because quickly you want the provinces adapted to your country. But provinces that were of the wrong culture, wrong religion would be helped to get a quorum, and would be very expensive too. We added also trading posts in Asia to have kind of a feature that would allow you to get colonies like the Portuguese or the British or the French did along the coast of India, by slowly investing money into the local infrastructure and end up with the province being able to buy the province. Kaigon at the time did a great mod, which was to add titles and governments, and especially to be able, basically at the time, every nations were kingdoms. And so he added some ways to have counts, dukes, already 10 years ago. And so he accepted that to be included in our mod. More collaboration with Darker, who was part of the Magna Mundi team at the time, the other mod for U3, which was an overhaul of everything regarding religions. There was Helios, part of the same team, who worked on the Sacra Romanum Imperium to add some flavor to the Holy Roman Empire, and War Dynamism from the Portuguese Albia, which allows you to have provinces added outside of peace deal. So if you hold in a war a province long enough, you get the control, the ownership of the province before the end of the war. And basically, if you manage after that to have a white peace, it's kind of, yeah, the peace deal acknowledges the change of ownership. In 2011, Luke started to work on death and taxes. So death and taxes was another mod. He was based, obviously for his name, on the famous quote by Benjamin Franklin, that nothing is certain but death and taxes. His aspect was more on mechanics. So he remodeled national ideas, sliders with big impact. Sunwoo, who is now part of our team, worked on province administration to show how some provinces couldn't be quite as efficient as others, and enhancing the AI. In 2013, they released EU4, and at that point, Luc and I were collaborating a lot, and we had a phase where we were both alone, each on our side, and we thought, let's stop being alone, let's work together. And we had the same ideas of wanting a mod that was based on historical plausibility, but I was more on the map and flavor side, and he was more on the mechanics side. So it was kind of a win-win scenario where we could both play on our strength. And so, well, basically, for the map designs, things didn't change much. There was slow evolution, more provinces, being able to orient as the map was more detailed, add more of, for example, imperial free cities, having to reduce the size of the unit sprites because, well, we had to keep clickability on the provinces that were much smaller. Then we, along with as time passed by, we try to use the geographical features. And for example, we added using the wastelands that were in the game, putting them as rivers so that armies cannot cross them as they want, and using the straits that are used to access some islands. For example, for the Yellow River, you can only cross the river here and in Nanjing. So you have to, when you want to go on a conquest, you have to pay attention to how the rivers are and how armies, but also communication efficiency, something Dean will be talking about in a moment, will function. You don't want, for example, to conquer here, to start conquering north and taking this province because there is no communication between Nanjing and this province. So you have to pay attention to what you conquer. So we added also mountains the same way, a bit like also what Paradox does and as also. And we thought that we didn't want to have big countries all over the place. So instead, we have oasis type of provinces, and using also straits, you can go from province to province, but for army displaced, army movement, and again, communication efficiency, we were able to create bigger difficulties in communication. But this is something that we will be talking about. So we also added some flavor. We're in Sweden, so a little word on Sweden 1356. Erik Magnusson is Prince, royal heir of Magnus Eriksson, and he's not happy with his father. He wants the throne immediately, so he rebels pushed a bit by the Swedish nobles to rebel against his father. He was not very popular, even though he had gotten Scania back from the Danish. And so he rebels, and so we start with a civil war in Sweden. So playing if the country that will earn provinces will win the war and inherit the other. And this, why didn't we do it with rebels? It's because we wanted to have the possibility to, for a historical ending of the rebellion, is that Magnus Eriksson was weak compared to his son, because the son has more support from the nobles. And so he passed a treaty with Denmark, saying, come and help me, and if you help me, I give you back Scania. And indeed, in the game, if you play the father, so if you play Sweden, here, well, I was in lack of inspiration, so it's Sverige. Sorry for the bad pronunciation of Swedish. So if you play the father in Sweden, when you win the war, you get an event to say, okay, do you abide by your agreement, or do you tell him to go back on his island? Of course, he won't like it, so if you don't give him back. So that was a bit of training in civil war using two nations. And so we then, Paradox added disasters that was allowing to create problems in the nation. And so we merged that idea of two nations rebellions with disaster for the Castilian Civil War, where Enrique de Trastamara is in rebellion against his cousin Pedro de Borgoña in Castile. With alliance, the game begins with Aragon allied with Trastamara against Castile. And the disaster allows us, if one of the nations loses his monarch, he wins the game, well, the civil war. And along those years, so I've started modding EU in 2006, I've been able to see that the increased support that we got from Paradox with maps that can more easily be edited, event files that are more accessible. And several years ago, we started having a user mod coordinator that allowed us a lot of discussions, allowing to make suggestions on what we wanted to have in mobility. Communications where Captain Gars would bring us back some input on what was doable and was not doable. And since Divine and others have talked with us and allowed us to really to have growing modeling sections in the change logs of the game. And one example is, if you maybe remember the map of Sweden, there are a lot of areas that are not colonized, and we didn't want to have Castile or England going to colonize there because it would be strange. So we removed any base values from those provinces, and these provinces were not colonizable. And we created used variables that was another neat addition in modability to store how many inhabitants those provinces would have, with settlements that would grow along the years. And when there was enough population, you would get the ownership. The problem with that, it was a bit clunky. We would have bugs and things that wouldn't work the way we wanted. And so lately we asked them, okay, we would like a scripted function that would allow us to limit the colonization of a province, really specifically by province. And this was added, and so now we can just say, okay, the provinces that are owned by Karelian or Sami natives, you can only colonize them if you're neighboring. So obviously, given the late announcements of Third Rome and diplomatic colonization, gives us lots of ideas that is model enough. And I'm sure we'll be able to discuss with them to get some changes in that. So along those years, besides the increased support, the discussion with the community of modders, of players, there has been some continuity that has allowed the mod to remain in the same philosophy. With Darper, as I said, was Dave Gracia, he, after Aegetis, he came back for U4, and he has done all our religious features. Sunwoo from Death and Taxes continued working on lots of features, and especially she's concentrating now on Asia, working on adapting the Mandate of Heaven features. Beta testing to have our minions test before we can release the game. Myzel, who has been working on tech and programming and all those wicked things. Azeron has been working on all the population, because it's something that Damien will be talking about, how we use now populations as the base values of the provinces, as well as balancing ideas. Cardinal on population also, and reworking the trade map. And Evander, who has been now is working on Mesoamerica, the interface each time that Paradox messes with the interface, and we have to adapt. And there has been some evolution, because we have new members that allow us to renew the modding blood of the team. So Manarn is working on balance, and he's really with you regarding balance. And he has taken the province administration feature from Sunwoo Death and Taxes and made communication efficiency, on which, as I said, we'll elaborate. Another Polish modder, Pepel, is working, doing lots of very neat artwork. Fus 87 with the head of Red, so, well, whatever his name is, on the forum, are working on improving the flags all over the place. And KGH, here present, Desmond, Flopsy, Tissa Fleshman are helping us on scripting, and our faithful minions of Damien, who has spent a year at the expense of his family. We're working on the development overhaul, and I will give him the floor.
Okay, so I'll go ahead. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I'll tell you real quick what got me into modding. So, like every modder, pretty much I found games that I really loved, which was Europa Universalis 4. And as much as I enjoyed it, I, of course, found things that I really wanted to change, right? And initially, it was development that I really wanted to change. And every time I played the game, I loved to kill France, because they were like the biggest kid in the room, and they had like the biggest city to capture. And every time I rolled in my 35k troops to occupy Paris, I always used to wonder, like, what's going on right there as I'm sieging Paris? Like, and once I occupy it, and the little hatches go over it, what's going on underneath there? Is Paris burning? Are my troops like looting Paris and taking away the wealth? Are people dying? Is there the lamentation of women there? Like, I wanted to know what was happening beneath the surface. And of course, it's EU4. It's mainly about external geopolitics and painting their colors across the world. And so I decided, like, hey, someone has to do something about that. Someone has to add granularity to the provinces themselves, So anyway, let's talk first about the modeling philosophy that EU4 tends to operate off of, so that you can better appreciate what we do in MT 2.0. So in Europa Universalis, as you know, you are a god king with magical powers, and nothing really happens in the country without you directly having some kind of hand in it, right? So you're the one who increases development, or you are the one who it causes economic growth and things like that. And you do so with mana and magical spells. Like, for instance, if you want to continue a war and you have a lot of war exhaustion, you spend some bird mana and you summon some birds who swoop down into the battle, and they drop swords and guns and food and clean socks and things like that, so that your soldiers can continue to fight. If you need stability, there's a drug the water spell where you can drug all the sleeping water, and all the peasants, unrest goes down. You can tax the peasants more, and they'll be pissed off. If you need more money on a consistent basis, there's a conjure money tree that you can conjure inside of a province, and then you get more tax income each tick. Right? If you want more productivity, there's a transmorph spell that turns you, the ruler, into a giant developer, and you can march off to a province and drag a big hoe across the field, and you get more productivity. Of course, if you need more people, there's a make more people spell. But before we go on to that, if there's any children in the audience or anyone with heart conditions, just let me know. Or we can just skip it because I don't want to complicate things. But anyway, the idea, ribbing aside, is that in EU4 you are more like a sculptor, right? And you have complete control over your country, which is the sculpture. And nothing really happens to it, no progress occurs on the sculpture unless you yourself make that change. But in MNT 2.0, you as the ruler, you're more like a gardener, right? So you set the parameters for prosperity and growth. Oops. There we go. Thank you. You set the parameters for prosperity and growth. So you provide the soil, you build the fence around the garden and the planter box, and you put it in a place with good sunlight, you make sure the rabbits can't get in and eat everything. And you kind of make sure you prune the plants so they don't shade each other out. So the way that you operate as ruler in MNT 2.0 is that you indirectly influence a lot of the factors of your country and to foster growth. And I'll go into a lot of those features now. And go over the development process that we had in the past year and a half for MNT 2.0. So at first it was kind of a pleasant accident. It was supposed to be a minor revision. And team members, Alderon and Cardinal, in the developers forum said, hey, we've got a great idea. Why don't we turn the development scores here into the population? Should be pretty easy, right? Should have some legwork involved. And of course, on their part, they knew what they were committing to because they're history students, and so they were our demographers, and they dusted off all the history books and had to research real historical population values for all of the thousands of wonderful provinces they got added. And that took ended up taking like a year, and it was a pretty impressive amount of work. So they came to me and said, hey, can you do the same thing you did with the development overhaul, except do it for population? Have population grow and decline and react to real world conditions. And my background's in population biology and ecology, and so this really excited me, right? But there were a few obvious problems. So first off, human populations grow at about 1% per year if unconstrained, right? But in game terms, over 500 years, that would mean that there are 144 times more people in the world at game end, if you go with that simple model. But during this particular time in history, populations only grew at about 2.5 times. So how do you constrain that growth so you don't have piles and piles of people by the end of the game? And so we turn to real factors that control populations historically, as well as what controls populations and wild populations families. So we turn to the Malthusian factors first. So you have famine, of course, which is a very notable factor. And famine occurs when you have a conspiracy of conditions like high population density, when you have warfare in the province, when you have poor weather, and when those conditions conspire together, you end up with famine, which can spread across the region depending on how connected the provinces are. And of course, most importantly, they kill people. And then of course you have plague, which is another fun one. And we model plague after actual epidemics that broke out historically, right? So it tends to follow roads, it tends to jump along ports, it tends to incubate in heavily populated areas like cities. So the merchant republics get hit very hard and stuff like that. And then we have war, of course, because whenever you go to war and you occupy a province, some people are put to the sword, and more tend to die of deprivation due to the various destructiveness of war. But that wasn't quite enough, right? Because some countries historically managed to avoid all of those Malthusian problems, like Switzerland for quite a period managed to avoid a lot of it. So we needed something else, right? Otherwise, some of those countries would just be huge. And so I turned to some principles in population biology, and we applied something called the logistical growth model to all of our provinces in game. And to put it simply, the way a logistical growth model works is that an ecosystem patch has a carrying capacity which determines how many individuals can actually be plausibly supported in that location, right? And so we applied that to every province. And as population grows closer toward that carrying capacity, growth slows down overall, right? And so when the population is significantly below the carrying capacity, there's more nice land, more resources, people are able to have more kids, and because there's more protein in people's diet and stuff like that, their fertility is higher, et cetera, et cetera. But this allowed us to control more concisely population growth throughout history. Because humans are ecosystem engineers, and they can slowly change their environment through technology to make it more suitable for human populations. But there was another problem. You can see here in Europe, you have, in the province of Wales, you have 5 pops for 50,000 people, which seems reasonable. But as soon as you go to other places like the Yangtze Delta in China, you can see that you literally have 20 times more people living there than the province in Wales. It's literally a million people living in that province. And so it kind of breaks the old economic model of Europa Universalis, because if you were to try to build a marketplace in that Welsh province with only 5 people in it, it would be 20 times less cost effective than doing it in China. And of course, China is just going to grow right into space because their ducks go a lot further. They're already growing into space as is in most cases. And so that presented the problem. So we figured we needed to pretty much reinvent the economic system that existed in the game. And so the first step was to create a dynamic system by which centers of trade actually move around the map depending on where trade actually is. So if you were to burn Venice to the ground, it would lose its center of trade modifier and go someplace else where there was a lot more trade. We created local economies that are in every province, and then local province AI2, which determines what to do with that money once you have enough economic growth. And so if you actually foster and protect your people and keep conditions favorable, you'll actually have natural organic growth, which results in the construction of new buildings and things like that. Tons of stuff about the economy. I don't want to talk all day about it because I think we're running out of time. Because we had these new demographic systems and economic systems, we thought we really need to tie in the other mechanics into this new reality, right? So we reinvented the states and ripped out all the old code, and then used the old interface and created a new estate system. And so estates now aren't just there to be built, and they can't simply be removed from a province willy-nilly. And what happens is at the beginning of the game, they're procedurally assigned to different provinces depending on the demographic and economic structure of that province. So for instance, if there's a big city in the province, hey, that's where burghers live, right? Burghers get their power from cities. And so then we had the various estates gain income from those provinces based on what the economy in the province was. So if a burgher is in a province that has a big city and 50% autonomy, the burghers will take half of that income for themselves, and the state takes the other half. And you can see here that the greater nobles have their own treasury. That's a type of estate. They have their own treasury, their own income. They have their own armies that you can call on, or they can use against you if you don't represent their interests well enough. They attempt to get privileges for themselves, which corrupts the central government, but advantages themselves. And so we have a whole new estate system, which is lots of fun. And so we made. So we made a lot of other interesting systems as well, and reinvented others. We reinvented the stability system. So now instead of mashing a button, you can actually improve stability from a multitude of different ways. Right? So for instance, if you go to your estates and you have -3 stability, and you're like, what do I do? Then you can say, hey, I'll give you some privileges, I'll offer you some favors to make you happy, and the estates, because they are happy, will then that will represent an increase in your stability. And so you have a lot of ways to attempt to increase stability other than just using monarch points. We made a new system, education system, where if you are an advanced and developed society, you can invest money in universities as well as give money to an education endowment to improve your universities. And we have a funding system by which you can just increase or decrease funding. It automatically takes money out of your treasury every month. And the AI, of course, has been trained to deal with all this stuff too. KJ is our AI guy who works on a lot of AI stuff, so he saved us at least like 6 months of time, I think. And we have the court system as well, because in this era, aside from the army, one of the main costs to a country was creating an opulent court that other countries would respect, in which your own internal power structure would respect as well. And so you can improve your court, you get lots of bonuses, and it tends to appease your states because they're entertained and they feel vested in the country. We have a new loot system, which really dramatically changes the way that players think about war. And what we did was we removed the old loot system and then put in a new loot system which takes advantage of the new economic system, right? So in every province, development is improving over time, and ducats are gathering in the province in the form of wealth. And you can go in, and once you occupy that province, your troops rifle through all that stuff, and they steal some of the ducats, and they burn down some of the buildings, and take some of the value of the infrastructure themselves. And then it's reflected at the end of the war as a loot pool. So war can be extremely damaging. So when you go to war, you absolutely positively don't want other countries invading your own country, because they can do long-term economic damage if you're not careful. And there's much, much more. Communication efficiency, for instance. Like we created new counter-inertial mechanisms for a country that gets really, really big, for instance. So in European Universalis for Manila, it was pretty easy to conquer tons and tons of stuff and not really suffer from any kind of internal decay mechanics. And so we have a communication efficiency system which makes it harder and harder to manage land that's further away. And then we also have a new corruption system in which the larger you are, the more you tend to accumulate corruption, and the more your privileges, or the more that estates feel they deserve privileges and things like that. And so the bigger you get, the harder it is to maintain internal control, even though it's easier to exert external control. And thank you for your attention, and we would like to thank everybody. I've added the thank you part.
Yep, we might be able to squeeze in a couple of questions here. I guess so. So yes, let's start down here.
Is there any part you haven't changed?
Yeah, there's the stuff that we haven't changed that we plan on changing. But,
Yeah, and then follow-up question. Is it part that you don't want to change, or part that you want to change in the future?
Yeah, a lot of it's a matter of what you're capable of. Yeah.
Please repeat the questions.
Oh, right. So, are there things that you want to change, but I guess can't change, or don't have time to change, or something like that?
Or things that we want. Are there things we haven't changed, and if it's because we don't want to change them, or because, well, the answer would be because we haven't had time to change them yet.
And sometimes you lack the modding tools to actually do what you want to do. So, changing a lot of military movement and stuff like that can be rather tricky. So, we'd like to change everything, but there's time and then there's tools. Right?
Okay, so why is the main starting date in May on taxes 1356, and why did you pick that?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of important historical events that happened at that point. So, why is 1356 the main start date? And one reason is because that's when the Black Death killed everybody. So it's kind of like a starting point, right? But there was also a lot of historical events that happened during that time too, as Diego expressed.
Yeah, the Swedish Civil War, the Castilian Civil War. In China, the UN Mongols are falling apart, so we could add lots of Chinese nations that are competing at the time, the Red Turban rebellions. So you have lots of opportunities to see it grow. The Ottomans are not as strong as in 1444, so they have to compete with the other Turkish nations. And the base idea was that it was also December 1356 is the moment that the Holy Roman Empire is changed from how it's been modeled in CK2 as big more monolithical, not monolithical nation, but to that kind of election system. And France is in a dire situation because in August 1356, the king was captured at the Battle of Poitiers, and so France ends up with no king to rule it, and has trouble and wants to ransom his king to get it back, and will lose a big chunk of Aquitaine at that point to get the king back. So it was lots of interesting events to call upon.
So, yeah, there we go.
So considering all the features that you have, Paradox mentioned they have a design document or something like that. How do you avoid feature creep in your mod?
We didn't. That's why you see so many features. No, I mean, because feature creep was a problem. And, you know, the problem is when you. And this is something I realized as soon as we got into population, and why population isn't used very often in a lot of these games is because there are so many inherent imbalances involved with population unless you redesign a lot of core aspects of the system, unless you account for many variables. And so we kind of couldn't afford feature creep. But that's also why we're releasing on Monday, by the way, because there's so many things we want to add, but no one wants to wait another year and a half, so there you go.
Yeah, I think it's we're gonna limit it to one more question.
Okay. Yeah.
You said you are working, or you're in contact with Paradox, that they help you to be able to develop more mechanics.
Yes.
Can you point out the single most helpful change that Paradox implemented?
So, I mean, modding tool-wise, this is kind of like a mundane answer.
Export variable?
Export to variable. So we used to, this is something that's easy to miss, but you used to not be able to have Paradox variables communicate with your own variables. And 2.0 is very calculation variable intense. And so if you wanted to export trade power to be able to like multiply it with some of your own variables, it was ridiculously difficult. But then they created an export to variable function which allowed you to just grab that variable, bring it into your own scripted variables, and then be able to use it however you want. But they did also give us add tech recently too, which could allow us to completely redesign the tech system. So we'll see. There's so much to get excited about. But,
you know Jake is sitting right there.
Oh, is he? So this is what we need. If you can come down and
So yeah, I think we will have to stop the questions there. But yeah, the guys are downstairs for a couple more hours, so you can just swing by and try out the vault.
The booth, and
Yeah.
we'll be happy to answer 2 more questions.
Ask questions, try the mod, and of course the mod is available for free on Monday.
On Monday, it's on the forum download, because Steam download is sometimes, upload is sometimes a bit of pain, so we prefer to iron it out in open beta on the forum download.
Forum exclusive, you heard it here.
Yeah.